In Charleston's wealthiest mansion, a desperate father makes an unthinkable promise. Whoever makes my son talk will marry me. His 6-year-old hasn't spoken since witnessing his mother's death in a mysterious fire 2 years ago. The words echo through marble halls, reaching the ears of Mia Rodriguez, the invisible cleaning lady with worn gloves and a secret hidden in her pocket, a photo of a son she buried years ago. When the silent child locks eyes with Mia across the room, something impossible happens. Recognition flashes between them, a connection that shouldn't exist. As Mia uncovers disturbing drawings of a woman trapped in flames and a man in a blue suit watching from outside, she's pulled into a web of deadly secrets. Why does this wealthy child have a toy identical to her dead son's? Why has Graham Wallace been watching her for years before hiring her? And most chilling of all, why does Noah's gaze haunt her with memories of a child the world believes is gone forever? This heart-wrenching story of a mother's unbreakable bond will keep you on the edge of your seat until its shocking conclusion. Sometimes the only voice that matters is the one that finds us in the depths of silence. Follow our channel for more emotional stories that will stay with you long after they end. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from, and share what you would do if you were in Mia's impossible situation. Charleston, South Carolina. A cold, overcast morning shrouded the grand Wallace estate in a melancholy haze. The sound of an ancient vacuum cleaner echoed across the marble floors of the silent mansion, its monotonous hum broken only by the occasional scrape of a bucket against the floor. Mia Rodriguez, 39, was on her knees, scrubbing the immaculate floor with worn-out gloves and a faded cloth. The jagged hole in her right glove exposed reddened skin, calloused from years of similar work. Her expression remained empty yet determined, the face of a woman who had learned to carry grief without letting it show. In her eyes, a contained mourning, as though she had perfected the art of crying inwardly while maintaining composure outwardly. In her pocket, a crumpled photograph, handled so often its edges had softened, its creases had deepened. A snapshot of a blond boy, his smile frozen in time, a smile that once lit up Mia's world, now preserved only in fading ink on cheap paper. Sometimes, when no one was watching, she would pull it out, touch the boy's face with her fingertip, then quickly tuck it away before anyone could notice her moment of vulnerability. From across the mansion came forced laughter, the clinking of expensive china, important voices discussing serious matters. A meeting was taking place in the East Wing. Journalists, psychologists, business associates, all gathered around the long mahogany table that had witnessed countless high-stakes negotiations. The host, Graham Wallace, he stood at the head of that table. At 45, the real estate mogul wore his custom Italian suit like armor, every button fastened, every crease precise. His posture was impeccable, shoulders squared, chin raised. But those who looked closely could see the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the slight tremble in his hand as he gestured toward the chair beside him. There sat Noah Wallace, age 6, staring vacantly at nothing. The boy's perfectly combed hair and pristine clothes couldn't mask the emptiness in his eyes. He hadn't spoken a word in 2 years, not since he'd watched his mother trapped in their burning summer home, her screams cutting through the roar of flames until silence fell. That silence had followed Noah ever since, wrapping around him like an invisible shield. "We've tried everything," a bearded neurologist said, closing his leather portfolio with finality. "Every test shows normal brain function. There's no physical reason for his mutism. It's psychological," added a woman with steel-rimmed glasses. "The trauma of witnessing his mother's death has created a block, but even our most innovative therapeutic approaches haven't broken through." A priest in the corner shook his head solemnly. "Sometimes the soul needs more time to heal than we can understand." Graham's jaw tightened as each specialist delivered their assessment. His knuckles whitened around his coffee cup when the final specialist, a renowned child psychologist from Johns Hopkins, leaned forward and said gently, "Mr. Wallace, I believe we must prepare for the possibility that Noah may never speak again." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Graham rose suddenly, the legs of his chair scraping harshly against the floor. His composed facade cracked, revealing raw desperation underneath. "No," he said, his voice rising. "That's not acceptable. That's not—" He slammed his hand on the table, causing Noah to flinch slightly, the boy's first visible reaction of the day. "Mr. Wallace?" someone began. "No!" Graham's voice echoed through the room. "Listen to me, all of you. I'll do anything. Anything. His eyes swept the room, challenging anyone to contradict him. Whoever makes my son talk again will marry me. I swear it. Did you hear me? Marry me. Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. A reporter shifted awkwardly in her seat. The psychologist exchanged glances with the neurologist. Mr. Wallace, perhaps we should discuss this privately, his assistant suggested quietly. But Graham wasn't joking. His eyes burned with determination, desperation, and something else. A man at the end of his rope, willing to bargain away his future for his son's voice. Behind the partially open door, Mia froze, her hands tightening around the dirty cloth she held. Her eyes widened as she absorbed the scene. The vacuum cleaner hummed forgotten beside her as she stood paralyzed, listening to a father's desperate plea. She knew that kind of silence. She'd lived it. After Elliot died, she hadn't spoken for months. No one had noticed. No one had been there to notice. But she recognized the silence that came after seeing someone you love disappear forever. And then it happened. Noah turned his head, ever so slightly. His vacant gaze shifted, moving past his father, past the specialists, finding the crack in the doorway where Mia stood. Their eyes met, just for a second. A fleeting moment that could have been imagined, but it wasn't imagination. Noah looked directly at Mia, as if he recognized her, as if he'd been waiting for her. It wasn't a smile, wasn't a nod, wasn't any clear acknowledgement, just a look. But in that look was something Mia hadn't seen in years, a spark of recognition, of connection. A chill ran down her spine, the kind she hadn't felt since the day they lowered her son's tiny casket into the ground. A strange, electric feeling, both terrifying and exhilarating. Why would this child look at her that way? How could he possibly know her? She was invisible in this house, just another set of hands to clean up messes, polish surfaces, and disappear before the important people noticed. Yet in that boy's eyes, for that split second, she'd been seen, really seen. And somehow the look in his eyes reflected something impossible, something that made her heart race and her breath catch. Because no one in this mansion knew she'd had a son. No one knew about Elliot. No one knew about the accident that took him, or how Mia had fought and failed to save him. That secret was buried as deeply as her boy. Yet somehow, in that fleeting glance, it felt as if Noah knew, as if he'd recognized something in her that no one else could possibly see. And that was impossible, wasn't it? 3 days had passed since the meeting, but Mia couldn't shake the weight of Noah's gaze from her mind. She continued her work with mechanical precision, dusting crystal figurines worth more than her monthly salary, polishing silver that gleamed under the chandelier's light, vacuuming Persian rugs that felt like clouds beneath her worn shoes. Yet something had fundamentally changed in the silent rhythm of the Wallace mansion. Every time she entered the hallway leading to the children's wing, she felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Noah never approached her, never smiled, never waved, but his eyes followed her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Those eyes, hazel with flecks of gold around the pupils, were eerily similar to Elliot's. Too similar. The kind of similarity that made her heart ache with impossible questions. On Thursday morning, while polishing the glass doors leading to the garden terrace, Mia spotted Noah sitting alone on the stone patio. The boy was hunched over, drawing with colored chalk on the smooth pavers. His small fingers worked with surprising intensity, creating shapes and lines that Mia couldn't quite make out from her position. She hesitated, cloth suspended mid-swipe on the glass. The household staff had been instructed to maintain distance from Noah. "Don't disturb him," Graham had ordered. "Don't try to engage him." But something pulled at Mia, an invisible thread connecting her to the silent child beyond the glass. Moving as quietly as possible, she slipped through the door and approached the patio. Noah remained absorbed in his drawing, unaware, or at least appearing unaware, of her presence. As she drew closer, she could finally see what had captured his attention so completely. A series of interlocking circles filled with colors that bled into one another, blues into purples, yellows into oranges. The pattern was complex, almost hypnotic. Noah suddenly stiffened, sensing her presence. In one swift motion, he dragged his sleeve across the artwork, smudging it into an unrecognizable blur of colors. The violence of the action startled Mia, and she took an involuntary step backward. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she knew he wouldn't respond. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Noah didn't look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the ruined drawing, his small chest rising and falling rapidly with agitated breaths. Then, slowly, he turned the piece of chalk in his hand, revealing 3 letters scratched into its side. M-E-A. Mia's breath caught. Was it meant to be her name? A misspelling, perhaps, or something else entirely? The coincidence seemed too significant to ignore, yet too strange to understand. She wanted to ask him, to kneel beside him and gently question what the letters meant. But Noah suddenly stood, dropping the chalk. It clattered against the stone as he walked away, disappearing through the garden gate without a backward glance. Later that afternoon, Mia overheard a conversation that sent ice through her veins. Graham stood in his study with Dr. Sophia Palmer, the lead psychologist working with Noah. "Something's changed," Palmer said, her voice carrying through the partially open door. "Noah's showing signs of awareness I haven't seen before. He's responding to stimuli in his environment." Graham's reply was eager, hopeful. "What does that mean? Is he getting better?" Palmer hesitated. "It means he's reacting to someone. And it's not me, not his teachers, not you." Her voice lowered, but Mia could still make out the words. "Have you noticed him responding to anyone else in the household?" A pause. "The staff? They barely interact with him. Perhaps we should review the security footage, see who he's watching." Mia's heart pounded as she quickly moved away from the door, her cleaning cart rattling slightly. That night she felt eyes on her everywhere. The security cameras in the corners, Graham's suspicious glances when she entered rooms, and most of all, Noah's haunting gaze that seemed to follow her even when he wasn't physically present. The following day, while cleaning the basement storage room, a task she'd specifically requested to avoid the main floors, Mia discovered an old cardboard box pushed far back against the wall. It wasn't sealed, and the corner of a singed teddy bear peeked out from beneath the lid. Curiosity overcame her professional discretion, and she carefully opened it. Inside lay the remnants of a child's life, preserved but damaged. Toys blackened by smoke and heat. A small pair of pajamas with cartoon rockets partially melted on one sleeve. Picture books with charred edges. These must be Noah's things, salvaged from the fire that took his mother. Her hands trembled as she lifted a small toy car from the box. The red paint was blistered on one side, but the other remained intact. A vintage model, with tiny rubber wheels and opening doors. Her heart stopped. It was identical to Elliot's favorite toy, the one he'd been clutching when the accident happened, the one the funeral director had gently suggested she keep rather than bury with him, the one she'd eventually thrown away because she couldn't bear to look at it anymore. But how? How could Noah have the exact same toy? It wasn't a common model. It had been her father's, passed down to Elliot, a family heirloom of sorts, from a family that had long since abandoned her. She stared at the toy in her palm, her mind racing to find a rational explanation. Coincidence? Many children had toy cars, but this specific model with its distinctive grille and the tiny license plate reading Joy 2? "What are you doing in here?" Graham's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. She nearly dropped the car, fumbling to place it back in the box. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just cleaning and that's private property." His tone was sharp, but there was something else beneath it. Fear? "You shouldn't be touching those things." "Of course. I apologize." Mia closed the box, but not before catching a glimpse of something else inside. A small hospital bracelet. The name was partially visible, Noah W., but the date of birth had been crossed out with thick black marker. As she stood to leave, Graham blocked her path. "How long have you worked here, Maria?" "Mia," she corrected softly. "3 months, sir." His eyes narrowed, studying her face with uncomfortable intensity. "Have you been spending time with my son?" "No, sir. Just cleaning as I'm supposed to?" Graham nodded slowly, clearly unconvinced. "Strange thing," he said, his voice taking on an unnervingly casual tone. "Noah drew something yesterday. First time he's drawn anything with words in it since the accident." Mia waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Just 3 letters," Graham continued. "MIA." He watched her reaction carefully. Now, isn't that a coincidence? The morning after Graham's confrontation, Mia arrived at work earlier than usual. The sky was still darkened with the lingering embrace of night, stars fading as dawn approached. She parked her rusted Honda 3 blocks away, a habit formed from shame rather than necessity. The other staff members drove newer vehicles, and her 20-year-old car with its mismatched door felt like a confession of her failures. The mansion was eerily quiet at this hour. Mia's footsteps echoed as she made her way through the service entrance, the familiar scent of lemon polish and old money enveloping her. She had a purpose today beyond her usual cleaning routine. Noah's bedroom was on her schedule, a rare occurrence as Mrs. Winters, the head housekeeper, typically handled the family's private spaces. "He's been making an absolute mess with those art supplies," Mrs. Winters had complained the previous evening. "I've got my hands full with preparations for Mr. E.A. Wallace's charity gala. You'll need to do a deep clean of the boys' room tomorrow." The door to Noah's bedroom was slightly ajar, a sliver of soft blue light spilling into the hallway. Mia hesitated, her heart racing. She shouldn't enter if he was still asleep. But a faint scratching sound from within told her the boy was already awake. She knocked softly. No response, as expected. She pushed the door open gently, revealing a room that was both opulent and heartbreakingly impersonal. Custom furniture, hand-painted murals of sailing ships and lighthouses, shelves lined with books that looked untouched. Despite the obvious expense, it felt like a showroom rather than a child's sanctuary. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by dozens of drawings. He didn't acknowledge Mia's presence, continuing to drag a crayon across the paper before him with singular focus. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers. Bach's Cello Suite No. 1. The same piece Mia used to play for Elliot before bed. "Good morning, Noah," she said softly, not expecting a response. "I'm just here to clean up a bit." As she moved around the room, dusting shelves and straightening items, she couldn't help but glance at the boy's artwork. Most children his age drew simple houses, stick figures, smiling suns. Noah's drawings were different, disturbing in their detail and consistency. Each page featured the same scene with slight variations. A woman trapped inside what appeared to be a building engulfed in flames. Her mouth was always open in a silent scream, hands pressed against a window. Outside the burning structure stood a man, watching. The figure was always drawn in blue, a blue suit, blue tie, blue shoes. In some drawings, the man's hand held something that looked like a key. Mia's stomach tightened. These couldn't be random creations from a child's imagination. They were too specific, too repetitive. They looked like memories, terrible ones. Gathering her courage, Mia knelt beside Noah. "These are very detailed drawings," she said, keeping her voice gentle. "Is this—" She hesitated. "Is this something you saw?" Noah continued drawing as if she hadn't spoken, but his crayon pressed harder against the paper, leaving deep indentations in the fibers. "The man in blue," Mia persisted, pointing to the figure. "Who is he?" Noah's hand stopped moving. For several seconds he remained perfectly still. Then slowly he reached for a photograph frame on his nightstand, one Mia had dusted dozens of times before. It contained a family portrait: Graham, his late wife Rebecca, and Noah, taken perhaps a year before the fire. In it, Graham wore a striking blue suit with a silver tie pin. Mia's blood turned to ice. "Noah," she whispered, "was your father there when the fire started?" The boy's eyes met hers, intense and knowing. He still didn't speak, but his fingers traced the outline of the blue figure in his drawing, then pointed deliberately to Graham in the photograph. A sharp knock on the doorframe made Mia jump. Rebecca Evans, Graham's personal assistant, stood in the doorway, her thin face pinched with displeasure. "What are you doing?" she asked coldly. Mia stood quickly, smoothing her uniform. "Just cleaning," as Mrs. Winters instructed. Rebecca's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. Mia kneeling beside Noah, the drawing scattered across the floor. Mrs. Winters said to clean, not to play therapist. "Mr. Wallace doesn't approve of staff engaging with Noah." "Of course. I apologize." Rebecca stepped into the room, glancing at the drawings with obvious discomfort. "I'll take Noah down for breakfast. Please finish your work quickly." Her voice softened as she addressed the boy. "Come along, sweetheart. Cook made your favorite waffles today." Noah gathered his drawings methodically, stacking them with care. As he stood to leave, he deliberately dropped one page near Mia's feet. Rebecca didn't notice, already turning toward the door with practiced efficiency. Once alone, Mia picked up the drawing. It was different from the others. This one showed the same burning building, the same trapped woman. But the man in blue now had a companion, A small female figure with dark hair, her hand stretched toward the flames. Written at the bottom in uneven letters, "Help." That evening, Mia lingered in the kitchen after her shift, pretending to organize cleaning supplies while eavesdropping on Gloria, the family's longtime cook. Gloria was speaking with Daniela, one of the newer maids, while preparing dinner. Such a shame about that fire, Gloria sighed, chopping vegetables with practiced precision. Miss Rebecca was a lovely woman, strong-willed, mind you, but kind. I heard it was faulty wiring, Daniela replied. Gloria's knife paused mid-chop. That's the official story. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But Mary, she was the night nurse back then, told me something strange. Said Miss Rebecca was found in the master bedroom, but the door was locked from the outside. The key was still in the lock. Maybe she locked herself in? People do strange things in panic. Gloria shook her head. How do you lock yourself in from the outside? No, something wasn't right about that night. She resumed chopping, her knife hitting the cutting board with more force than necessary. Mr. Wallace said he arrived too late, that the fire was already too intense. But his clothes smelled like smoke when he came to the main house. And he wasn't even singed. She crossed herself quickly. Not that I'm suggesting anything, mind you. It's not my place. Mia's hands trembled as she arranged bottles of cleaner on the shelf. The drawings, the locked door, Graham's blue suit. Later that night, unable to sleep in her small apartment, Mia found herself staring at the ceiling, piecing together fragments of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. Noah's silent communication, the toy car identical to Elliot's, Graham's suspicious behavior. Everything pointed to something darker than a tragic accident. In the shadowy corner of her bedroom, Elliot's framed photo seemed to watch her, his smile a permanent reminder of all she'd lost. What is happening? She whispered to the empty room. What am I supposed to see? As if in answer, she remembered one final detail from the day, a moment she'd nearly forgotten in the chaos of discoveries. While Graham ate dinner alone in the massive dining room, she'd overheard him speaking softly to Noah, who sat silently beside him picking at his food. I just wish you'd forget what happened, Graham had whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. I just wish you'd forget what you saw. The Medical University of South Carolina stood like a fortress of modern medicine against the Charleston skyline, its glass and steel architecture gleaming in the midday sun. Mia clutched her purse tightly as she walked through the automatic doors. Her Sunday best, a faded navy dress and worn pumps, drawing curious glances from staff in crisp white coats. She didn't belong here among the educated and affluent, yet determination propelled her forward. She'd called in sick to work today, something she'd never done before. The lie had tasted bitter on her tongue as she spoke to Mrs. Winters, claiming a stomach virus. But Noah's drawings and Gloria's whispered revelations had made sleep impossible for 3 nights running. She needed answers, even if seeking them cost her job. The hospital directory listed maternal records on the 4th floor. As the elevator ascended, Mia rehearsed her story in her head. She was Rebecca Wallace's cousin visiting from Arizona, hoping to gather medical history for Noah's ongoing treatment. The lie felt flimsy, but it was all she had. The records department receptionist, a middle-aged woman with cat-eye glasses and burgundy lipstick, eyed Mia with immediate suspicion. Rebecca Wallace's records? Those would require proper authorization. Are you family? Distant cousin, Mia replied, the words catching in her throat. Noah, her son, has been having some health issues and the doctors want to check for genetic factors. The receptionist's eyebrows rose. Strange. Since Mr. Wallace himself was here last month requesting the same records, wouldn't he have shared them with Noah's doctors? Mia's heart raced. Graham had been looking into Rebecca's medical history. Why? He might have forgotten. He's been under tremendous stress. I'm sure he has. The receptionist's voice softened slightly. But I still can't release those records without authorization. Hospital policy. Deflated but not defeated, Mia nodded and turned to leave. As she waited for the elevator, a male nurse with salt and pepper hair approached, coffee cup in hand. Couldn't help overhearing, he said quietly. You're asking about Rebecca Wallace? Mia nodded cautiously. I remember you, he continued, studying her face. You were here before, weren't you? Years ago? Confusion clouded Mia's features. No, I've never been to this hospital. The nurse frowned. Could have sworn. He shook his head. But you weren't using the name Rodriguez then. It was something else. Carter, maybe? Or Carver? Ice flooded Mia's veins. Carver had been her married name, before the divorce, before Elliot's death, before she'd reclaimed her maiden name and tried to bury the past. "I think you're mistaking me for someone else," she managed, her voice barely audible. "Maybe." He didn't look convinced. "Memory plays tricks. Anyway, about Mrs. Wallace, I was on duty the night she delivered Noah. Beautiful baby, but complicated birth. She nearly didn't make it." He lowered his voice further. The strange thing was, Mr. Wallace insisted on no visitors, no photos, no birth announcement. Said they'd had problems with stalkers because of his wealth. But the way she looked at that baby? He trailed off, lost in the memory. "What do you mean?" Like she was afraid. Not the usual new mother nerves. Real fear. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, but Mia made no move to enter. Never did understand it, especially since... He stopped abruptly, seeming to reconsider his words. "Since what?" Mia pressed. The nurse glanced around, then spoke in a near whisper. "Since the blood type issue. It came up during her transfusion. Mr. Wallace is AB negative, very rare. Mrs. Wallace was O positive. Their baby was O negative." He gave Mia a meaningful look. "I'm no geneticist, but even I know that's not possible with those parents." The revelation hit Mia like a physical blow. Noah couldn't be Graham and Rebecca's biological child. It was genetically impossible. The drive back to her apartment complex was a blur, her mind racing through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. If Noah wasn't Graham's biological son, whose child was he? And did Rebecca know? Is that what the argument before the fire had been about? Her tiny one-bedroom apartment felt even more claustrophobic than usual as she paced the worn carpet, trying to make sense of everything. On impulse, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. After 4 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Hello? Janice? It's Mia. Mia Rodriguez. We were at Palmetto Children's Home together." A pause. "Mia? Oh my God, it's been, what, 15 years? How are you?" The small talk felt surreal given the circumstances, but Mia forced herself through the motions, exchanging pleasantries before steering the conversation toward what she really needed to know. "Janice, I need to ask you something about when I was adopted. You were there longer than I was. Do you remember anything unusual?" Janice's voice grew cautious. "Unusual how?" "About my records, my history, anything." A long silence followed. "Mia, there was something. I never told you because it seemed cruel. Mrs. Harmon, remember her? The office manager? She mentioned once that there was a mix-up with your adoption." Mia's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of mix-up?" "The family that adopted you, the Carvers. They were supposed to get a different child. There was some clerical error. By the time it was discovered, the bonds had already formed, and they decided not to disrupt things." The revelation was like a stone dropped into still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. "And Elliot? My son? Was there anything strange about his birth certificate or records?" Another uncomfortable pause. "Mia, this is going to sound awful, but Elliot was never legally registered as your son. The Carvers never formally adopted him after you had him. He was never properly documented. Legally speaking, he didn't exist." The world tilted beneath Mia's feet. Her precious boy, the center of her universe for 5 brief, beautiful years, had been a ghost in the system. No birth certificate, no social security number, no official record of his life or death beyond a handwritten note in a county coroner's file. "Why wouldn't they have told me this?" she whispered. "After your divorce, the Carvers cut all ties with you. They wanted nothing to do with you or the baby. I only know because Mrs. Harmon mentioned it when I was helping with the file reorganization. She said it was the saddest case she'd ever seen, a child with no legal identity." As the call ended, Mia sat frozen on her second-hand couch, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that vaguely resembled a child's profile. The pieces were beginning to form a picture she could barely comprehend. A child of uncertain origin, a wealthy couple with secrets, a fatal fire, and somehow, impossibly, her own past intertwined with it all. The next morning, Mia returned to work with dark circles beneath her eyes and a new sense of purpose. She found Noah in the garden, sitting alone on a stone bench, watching butterflies flit between late-blooming flowers. Without speaking, she sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. After several minutes, She pulled the photograph of Elliot from her pocket and placed it on the bench between them. Noah glanced at it, then at her. His small hand moved cautiously toward hers, finally gripping her fingers with surprising strength. For the first time since she'd begun working at the Wallace mansion, Mia saw something new in Noah's eyes. Not just recognition or curiosity, but trust. They sat like that hand in hand until Mrs. Winters called Noah in for lunch. As he stood to leave, he placed his other hand over his heart, then pointed to the photograph of Elliot. That simple gesture shattered what remained of Mia's certainty about the world. Because in that moment, with sunlight dappling through the trees and birdsong filling the air, she finally acknowledged the impossible thought that had been growing in her mind. What if Noah and Elliot were somehow the same child? Thunder rolled across Charleston as rain pounded against the windows of Mia's apartment. 3 a.m., and sleep remained elusive, banished by the storm outside and the tempest of thoughts within. She sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by what little evidence she had. Noah's drawing with "Help" scrawled at the bottom, Elliot's faded photograph, and an old newspaper clipping about the Wallace fire she'd found in the public library archives. The article was frustratingly vague. Prominent businessman Graham Wallace tragically lost his wife Rebecca in an electrical fire at their summer home on Sullivan's Island. Mr. Wallace and the couple's young son survived unharmed. Nothing about locked doors. Nothing about suspicious circumstances. The power of wealth to shape narratives was evident in every carefully chosen word. A sharp knock at her door made Mia flinch, her heart leaping to her throat. Who would come calling at this hour, in this weather? Fear and curiosity battled as she approached the door, peering through the peephole. A woman stood in the dimly lit hallway, rain dripping from her coat onto the threadbare carpet. Her face was partially obscured by a hood, but something about her posture seemed familiar. "Who is it?" Mia called, one hand on the chain lock. "Someone who knows what happened that night," came the reply, voice barely audible above the rain. "Someone who worked for him when it happened." Mia hesitated, then unlatched the chain. The woman who stepped inside was older than Mia had initially thought, perhaps in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and deep lines etched around eyes that had witnessed too much. "My name is Eleanor Fletcher," she said, removing her dripping coat. "I was the head housekeeper at the Wallace estate before Mrs. Winters, before the fire." Mia's apartment suddenly felt even smaller, the air heavy with the weight of imminent revelations. "Why are you here? How did you find me?" Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. Small circles in Charleston's service industry. Word gets around when someone starts asking questions about the Wallaces. She glanced at the scattered papers on Mia's bed. "And it seems you've been asking many questions." "I need to understand what's happening," Mia said simply. "Noah has started communicating with you." It wasn't a question. "That's why I'm here, because that boy hasn't connected with anyone since his mother died. Until you." They sat at Mia's tiny kitchen table, steam rising from hastily made coffee in mismatched mugs. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "I was there the day of the fire. Not at the beach house, but I heard the argument before they left." Her eyes took on a faraway look. Rebecca was frantic, throwing clothes into suitcases, crying. Graham was trying to calm her down, but she kept saying she had proof now, that she was going to expose everything. "Proof of what?" Mia leaned forward. "That Noah wasn't his son." Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper, though no one else was present to hear. She'd done a home DNA test in secret. The results came that morning. She kept screaming at him. "He's not yours, he never was, I'm taking him away from all of this." Lightning flashed outside, momentarily illuminating Eleanor's aged face in stark relief. Graham followed her to the beach house. He told everyone he was going to reason with her to work things out, but I saw his face when he left. It wasn't the face of a man going to reconcile. It was the face of a man who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. Mia's coffee grew cold, untouched. "You think he started the fire?" Eleanor's eyes met hers unflinching. "I know he did, because I heard Rebecca on the phone right before she left. She called me, hysterical, saying she'd found adoption papers hidden in Graham's private safe. Papers showing that Noah had been adopted through irregular channels, that his birth records had been falsified, that Graham had been obsessed with having an heir, no matter the cost." Did she say where Noah came from? Some private adoption broker that dealt with problem cases, orphans with clouded documentation, children whose paperwork had been lost or mishandled. Graham paid a fortune to get a child quickly, no questions asked. Eleanor paused, her weathered hands wrapping tighter around her mug. But there was something else, something that made Rebecca truly afraid. She said Noah had started drawing pictures of a woman he couldn't possibly remember, his birth mother, and talking about memories he shouldn't have had from before he came to them. A chill ran through Mia that had nothing to do with the storm outside. What kind of memories? A car crash, a hospital, being taken away from someone he loved. Eleanor's eyes bore into Mia's. Rebecca believed Noah had some sort of connection to his past, that he remembered things he shouldn't be able to remember, things that happened when he was too young to form memories. Mia's mouth went dry. And then, that night after Graham left for the beach house, I received one final call from Rebecca. She was locked in the bedroom, terrified. She said Graham had gone crazy when she threatened to take Noah and leave, that he'd started pouring gasoline around the house, saying if he couldn't have his family, no one would. Eleanor's voice cracked. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, it was too late for Rebecca. The official report said she died of smoke inhalation, but the bedroom door was locked from the outside. The key was still in the lock when firefighters broke through. And Noah? Mia barely managed to whisper the question. Graham claimed he'd rescued the boy before the fire spread, but one of the paramedics told me Noah was already outside when Graham brought him to the ambulance, almost as if someone else had gotten him out first. Eleanor reached into her purse and withdrew a faded envelope. After Rebecca died, I was fired immediately. Graham claimed downsizing, but we both knew the truth. Before I left, I took this from Rebecca's personal items that survived the fire. The envelope contained a single photograph, a young woman holding a newborn baby in what appeared to be an orphanage setting. The woman's face was partially obscured, but something about her posture, her hands, was hauntingly familiar. Rebecca found this hidden in Graham's office, Eleanor explained. It came with Noah's original adoption file. She believed it was his birth mother. With trembling fingers, Mia turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, Elliot Carver, born May 12th, with mother. The world seemed to stop spinning as Mia stared at her married name, at her son's name, written in a stranger's handwriting on a photograph she'd never seen before. A photograph that couldn't possibly exist. This doesn't make sense, she whispered. Elliot died, I buried him. I saw his body after the accident. Eleanor's expression was a mixture of compassion and grim certainty. Did you? Or did you see a child's body presumed to be your son? Were there formal identifications, documentation? Or was everything handled by the Carvers who, according to what you've told me, never legally registered Elliot to begin with? The implications crashed over Mia like a tidal wave, threatening to drown her in their enormity. If what Eleanor suggested was even remotely possible, if by some twisted chain of events, Noah was actually Elliot, then everything she'd believed about her life for the past 5 years had been a carefully constructed lie. I need to talk to Graham, Mia said, rising suddenly. I need to confront him with this. Eleanor caught her wrist. Be careful. Graham Wallace would do anything to keep his secrets buried. Remember what happened to Rebecca. Outside, the storm began to subside, first light bleeding into the eastern sky. A new day was dawning, one that would forever change the course of Mia's life, and the life of a little boy who had lived in silence far too long. Rain continued to fall across Charleston that evening, transforming the city into a shimmering landscape of reflected lights and shadows. The Wallace mansion loomed against the darkening sky, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. Inside, Mia moved through the corridors with newfound purpose, her cleaning cart a convenient disguise for her real mission. The household staff whispered that Graham had been in a volatile mood all day, canceling meetings and barking orders before locking himself in his study with a bottle of 18-year-old Macallan. Perfect. An occupied Graham meant a temporarily unsupervised Noah. As Mia approached Noah's room, her pulse quickened. The photograph from Eleanor burned in her pocket, its implications almost too overwhelming to contemplate. She needed confirmation, something more concrete than a faded picture and secondhand stories. She needed to hear Noah speak, but when she gently pushed open his bedroom door, the room appeared empty. The bed was neatly made, toys arranged with unnatural precision on shelves. No sign of the boy. Noah? She called softly, stepping inside. A muffled sound drew her attention to the large antique desk in the corner. She approached cautiously, crouching down to peer underneath. There, in the shadowy space beneath the desk, Noah sat huddled with his knees pulled to his chest. His eyes were wide and rimmed with red, face streaked with silent tears. "Hey," Mia whispered, kneeling to his level. "What's wrong? Why are you hiding?" Noah didn't respond verbally, but his small hand emerged from the shadows, clutching a photograph. With trembling fingers, he held it out to her. The image showed Noah, or perhaps Elliot, as a toddler, sitting on the lap of a woman whose face had been deliberately cut out of the picture. The background was unmistakable, the distinctive mural of the Palmetto Children's Home, the place where Mia had spent her own childhood before adoption. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Noah pointed toward Graham's bedroom across the hall, then made a turning motion with his hand. The safe. He'd somehow accessed Graham's private safe, perhaps watched him open it enough times to memorize the combination. The thought sent chills down Mia's spine. How much did this silent child observe? How much did he understand? She held out her arms, an invitation rather than a demand. After a moment's hesitation, Noah crawled out from under the desk and into her embrace. His small body trembled against hers, his heart racing like a trapped bird. Mia stroked his hair, the familiar texture of it bringing back a flood of memories. Elliot's hair had felt exactly the same, fine and soft as corn silk between her fingers. "It's going to be okay," she murmured, unsure if she was comforting him or herself. "We'll figure this out together." As she held him, Noah's hand slipped into her pocket, extracting the photograph Eleanor had given her. He stared at it intently, recognition flickering in his eyes. Then with deliberate movements, he reached for the drawing pad on his desk. His crayon moved swiftly across the page, creating a simple but clear image. A car, overturned. A woman, crying. A small boy being carried away by a man in what appeared to be a doctor's coat. Mia's breath caught. Do you remember that?" Noah nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. His lips parted, quivering with effort, as if the words had been imprisoned for so long they'd forgotten the way out. When they finally came, they emerged as a hoarse whisper, rusty from disuse. "Mommy?" The single word shattered Mia's world. It wasn't just the word itself. It was the inflection, the particular way the second syllable lilted upward at the end. Exactly the way Elliot had always said it. Time seemed to stop as they stared at each other, the impossible truth hanging between them. Then Mia began to sob, quiet, broken sounds that she muffled against Noah's, Elliot's, shoulder. The boy's small arms wrapped around her neck, holding on with surprising strength. "I knew you'd find me," he whispered, each word clearly requiring immense effort. I waited. Outside the room, a floorboard creaked. Mia tensed, pulling back to look at Noah with a warning finger to her lips. They listened, frozen, but no further sounds followed. Still, the moment of connection had been interrupted, reality intruding on their fragile reunion. "We need to be careful," Mia whispered. Graham can't know that you've spoken to me." "Not yet." The word father had nearly slipped out, but it felt wrong now. A lie neither of them could sustain. Noah nodded, understanding far beyond his years evident in his solemn expression. He pulled his drawing pad closer, scribbling quickly. When he turned it around, Mia read, "He hurt my other mom." The confirmation of what Eleanor had told her, what she'd already begun to suspect from Noah's earlier drawings, sent ice through her veins. "I know, sweetheart. I'm so sorry," Noah wrote again. "He took me from the hospital. After the crash, memories flashed through Mia's mind. The car accident that had supposedly claimed Elliot's life. Her own injuries had been severe. She'd been unconscious for days. By the time she awoke, the Carvers had already identified Elliot's body and arranged a closed casket funeral. She'd been too broken, physically and emotionally, to question anything, to demand to see her son one last time. "But how?" she whispered, more to herself than to Noah. How could he have known about the accident? How could he have been there? Noah's crayon moved again. He paid the doctor. Of course. Graham Wallace, with his immense wealth and connections, could easily have bribed medical staff. A child with no official documentation, a mother too injured to protest, adoptive grandparents who'd already washed their hands of both of them. It would have been terrifyingly simple to make Elliot disappear, and for Noah to appear in his place. "We need proof," Mia said, her mind racing. "Something concrete that will make people believe us." Noah seemed to consider this, then wrote, DNA test? Mia blinked in surprise. Yes, that's exactly right. But how do you know about DNA tests? He pointed to his ear, then to the wall. He'd overheard conversations, likely between Graham and his lawyers or doctors. The realization that this 6-year-old had been silently gathering intelligence, piecing together the mystery of his own identity while pretending to be locked in a world of trauma-induced mutism, was both heartbreaking and awe-inspiring. I'll find a way, Mia promised. But until then, we have to act normal. Can you do that? Can you pretend for a little longer? Noah nodded, his expression resolute. Then he did something unexpected. He deliberately mussed his hair, pinched his cheeks to redden them, and let his eyes unfocus, slipping back into the vacant stare he'd maintained for 2 years. The transformation was so complete, so convincing that Mia felt a chill. This child had been playing a role, waiting for the right moment, the right person, waiting for her. As she reluctantly rose to leave, Noah tugged her hand once more, pressing something into her palm. It was a small key, tarnished with age. "What's this for?" she whispered. He pointed toward Graham's room again, then made a motion like opening a box. Another hiding place, somewhere even more secret than the safe, somewhere that might contain the evidence they needed. Just then, the sound of Graham's study door opening echoed down the hallway. Mia quickly slipped the key into her pocket and picked up her neglected cleaning supplies. By the time Graham's footsteps approached, she was dutifully polishing the door frame, and Noah was sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring vacantly at a picture book, the perfect image of the traumatized, silent child everyone expected him to be. Their eyes met briefly as Graham entered the room. In that fleeting glance was a promise, unspoken but binding. Neither of them would rest until the truth was revealed, until they reclaimed what had been stolen from them both, their identity as mother and son. 3 days had passed since Noah spoke his first word. 3 days of secret glances, whispered conversations when no one was watching, and careful planning. Mia moved through the mansion like a ghost, performing her duties with mechanical precision, while her mind worked furiously on their escape plan. The small brass key Noah had given her remained hidden in her apartment, taped beneath her bathroom sink, awaiting the perfect moment to be used. That moment arrived sooner than expected. The Wallace Foundation's annual charity gala, a lavish affair that required the entire household staff to be present at the Charleston Yacht Club, left the mansion nearly empty for the final preparations. Graham, distracted by speeches and donor meetings, had ordered Noah to remain home with his tutor, Ms. Larson, an elderly woman who routinely fell asleep during their afternoon sessions. Mia had volunteered to stay behind to finish some deep cleaning, an offer Mrs. Winters accepted with suspicious hesitation before ultimately relenting. "The guest bathrooms need a complete overhaul before tomorrow's brunch," she'd conceded. "But join us at the gala as soon as you're finished. Mr. Wallace wants all staff present by 8. Now, with the mansion quiet save for Ms. Larson's soft snores from the library, Mia slipped into Graham's bedroom. The opulence was suffocating. Hand-painted silk wallpaper, antique furniture that had likely furnished European palaces, and a bed large enough to sleep 6. This was a room designed not just for comfort but for displaying wealth, power, status. The brass key fit a small, ornate wooden box hidden behind a false panel in Graham's closet, a hiding place Noah had discovered during his silent observations of the man who claimed to be his father. Mia's hands trembled as she turned the key, the lock releasing with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the silent room. Inside lay a collection of documents, meticulously organized. Adoption papers with official-looking seals, medical records, and, most damning of all, a DNA test report dated just weeks before Rebecca's death. The results were highlighted in yellow. Probability of paternity, 0%. The alleged father is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. A soft noise at the doorway made Mia start. Noah stood there, his small figure silhouetted against the hallway light, Ms. Larson's gentle snoring still audible from down the hall. "I found it," Mia whispered, holding up the report. "This proves you're not his biological son." Noah nodded, not surprised. He'd known, or at least suspected, for longer than anyone realized. He crossed the room with deliberate steps and pointed to another folder in the box, one Mia hadn't yet examined. Inside was a series of photographs, surveillance images of Mia leaving her previous apartment, shopping at grocery stores, even visiting Elliot's grave. The earliest ones dated back nearly 3 years, long before she'd ever applied to work at the Wallace estate. With growing horror, she realized the truth. Graham hadn't hired her by coincidence. He'd been watching her for years, perhaps tracking her every movement. But why? If he'd stolen her son, wouldn't he want her as far away as possible? The answer came from the final document in the folder, a private investigator's report. It detailed Mia's deteriorating mental health after Elliot's death, her divorce, her financial struggles, and most significantly, a psychological evaluation declaring her emotionally unstable and potentially delusional following her loss. The report concluded, subject poses no credibility threat, unlikely to be believed if she makes claims about the child. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Graham had kept tabs on her not out of fear, but out of calculated assessment. He'd determined she was no threat, a broken woman whom no one would believe. And then, in an act of almost unimaginable cruelty, he'd brought her into his home as a servant, forcing her to clean the floors of the man who had stolen her child. He knew, she whispered, nausea rising in her throat. He knew who I was all along. Noah's small hand found hers, squeezing with reassurance beyond his years. His eyes held no surprise, just grim confirmation of something he'd suspected during his years of silent observation. We need to get these tested, Mia said, gathering the documents and the DNA samples she'd collected. Strands of Noah's hair, her own cheek swab. I have a friend at the university lab. She can run the comparison discreetly. 3 agonizing days later, Mia stood in a sterile laboratory after hours, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across her face as she stared at the computer screen. Her friend, Dr. Leanne Chen, pointed to the highlighted sections of the report. There's no question, Mia, Leanne said softly. The genetic markers are conclusive. You are, without any doubt, this child's biological mother. The probability is 99.99998%. The confirmation, the scientific, undeniable proof that Noah was indeed her Elliot, sent Mia collapsing into a nearby chair, emotions too complex to name flooding through her. Relief, vindication, rage, and underneath it all, a maternal love so fierce it threatened to consume her. I need copies, she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Official copies, notarized. Leanne hesitated. Mia, what are you planning to do? If what you've told me is true, this man is extremely powerful, with connections throughout Charleston. He could make these results disappear, discredit the lab, ruin my career. I'm not going to the authorities. Not yet. Mia had considered every angle, every potential path. Going public would mean subjecting Noah to media scrutiny, psychological evaluations, endless questioning. He'd already endured too much trauma. I'm going to confront Graham directly, with evidence he can't deny. The next morning, as sunshine streamed through the mansion's windows with cruel cheerfulness, Mia approached Graham in his study. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, her demeanor outwardly calm, though her heart hammered against her ribs with such force she feared he might hear it. I need to speak with you, she said, closing the door behind her. About Noah. Graham looked up from his computer, irritation flickering across his features. Whatever housekeeping concerns you have, take them to Mrs. Winters. This isn't about housekeeping. Mia placed the DNA results on his desk, along with copies of the documents she'd found in his hidden box. This is about the fact that Noah is actually Elliot, my son, the son you stole from me after the car accident. The color drained from Graham's face, his carefully constructed world visibly crumbling around him. For a moment, he seemed genuinely at a loss for words, perhaps the first time in his life that his money and power couldn't immediately solve a problem. You're insane, he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. These could be faked. You could have planted those documents. We both know they weren't, and I didn't. Mia's voice remained steady, her newfound strength derived from absolute certainty. Noah remembers the crash. He remembers being taken. And he started talking again. To me. That revelation hit Graham like a physical blow. His hand reached reflexively for the crystal tumbler of whiskey on his desk. What do you want? He asked, his voice hoarse. Money? A promotion? Name it. The casual offer, as if her son were a negotiable asset, ignited a fury in Mia that momentarily robbed her of speech. When she found her voice again, it was cold, precise, and utterly uncompromising. I want my son back. I want you to admit what you did. To the authorities, to Noah, to yourself. I want justice for Rebecca, who died because she discovered your secret. She leaned forward, hands flat on his expensive desk. Or I take everything to the press. Every document, every DNA result, every drawing Noah made of the fire, of you watching while Rebecca burned. Graham's expression darkened, calculation replacing shock. You'd put him through that? The media circus, the legal battles, they'd say you abandoned him, they'd question your fitness as a mother. Your mental health would be dissected in court. He gestured to the psychiatric evaluations in the pile. I have resources you can't imagine. The best lawyers in the country. Judges who owe me favors. You're right, Mia acknowledged, having anticipated this response. A public fight would hurt Noah more than anyone. That's why I'm giving you one chance to do this quietly on our terms. Our terms? Graham's eyebrow arched. Mine and Noah's. She placed a folded document before him. A legally binding agreement her friend Leanne's husband, a family law attorney, had drafted pro bono. Full legal custody returns to me. A trust fund for Noah's education and future. Your public story will be that you've discovered Noah's long-lost mother and are doing the noble thing by reuniting us. Your reputation stays intact. You avoid prison. Graham stared at the document, weighing his options with the cold calculation of a man who viewed even this situation as a business transaction to be optimized. And if I refuse, then I don't just go to the media. I go to the FBI with evidence of kidnapping, identity fraud, and your involvement in Rebecca's death. Mia's bluff was only partial. She did have enough evidence to open an investigation, though perhaps not enough for a guaranteed conviction. The standoff stretched for what felt like hours, though in reality it was less than a minute. Finally, Graham reached for a pen, his hand surprisingly steady as he signed the document. He was never supposed to be yours, he said quietly, a hint of his true nature showing through the polished veneer. The accident was an opportunity. The doctor owed me favors. The boy had no official records, it seemed meant to be. He looked up, something almost like genuine emotion in his eyes. I did love him, you know, in my way. Mia took the signed document, refusing to acknowledge his attempt at justification. Your way wasn't enough. It never could be. As she turned to leave, Graham called after her. He'll never forget me. I've been his father for 2 years. Mia paused at the door, meeting his gaze one final time. No, you've been his kidnapper. I've been his mother his entire life, even when I didn't know where he was. That's the difference between us, Mr. Wallace. And that's why, in the end, you've lost. The Charleston Cathedral of St. John the Baptist stood resplendent in the morning light, its stained glass windows casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the marble floor. Outside, a parade of luxury vehicles lined the street. Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, and sleek European sports cars that cost more than most people's homes. Photographers jostled for position behind velvet ropes, their cameras aimed at the cathedral steps where Charleston's elite gathered in designer suits and couture dresses. The headline in the morning's Charleston Post and Courier had sent shockwaves through high society. Wallace miracle, billionaire to wed woman who healed his son. The article beneath detailed the heartwarming tale of how a humble housekeeper had somehow broken through Noah Wallace's trauma-induced silence, earning both the child's trust and his father's heart in the process. It was the kind of fairy tale the public devoured, Cinderella with a modern twist, complete with a happy ending broadcasted live for the consumption of the masses. Only 3 people knew the truth behind the spectacle. Graham, whose calculated public relations strategy had transformed potential scandal into a narrative of redemption, Mia, who had agreed to the charade for Noah's sake, and Noah himself, who now stood in a custom-tailored suit beside his biological mother, his small hand clutching hers with fierce protectiveness. "You look beautiful," Noah whispered, the words coming easier each day as his long silence receded into memory. He'd been speaking more frequently now, though still only to Mia, and only when they were alone. To the rest of the world, he remained the traumatized child who had miraculously spoken his first words to the woman his father was now marrying. Mia smiled down at him, adjusting the boutonniere on his lapel. The ivory dress she wore was simple but elegant, chosen by Graham's stylists to present the perfect image to the waiting cameras. Her dark hair had been arranged in an elaborate updo, dotted with tiny white flowers that matched her modest bouquet. She looked every inch the blushing bride, except for the steel in her eyes that revealed her true purpose. "Remember what we discussed?" she said softly, bending to straighten Noah's already perfect tie. "Once we're inside, follow the plan. Not a word to anyone." Noah nodded solemnly. For a 6-year-old, his understanding of adult deception was unnervingly advanced, a consequence of 2 years spent silently observing the manipulations of the man who had stolen him. Graham appeared at their side, resplendent in a custom tuxedo, his smile practiced to perfection for the cameras. "It's time," he said, offering his arm to Mia. "Everyone's waiting. The governor just arrived." Inside, the cathedral had been transformed into a floral wonderland. Thousands of white roses, orchids, and lilies cascaded from the columns and pews, their delicate perfume hanging heavy in the air. A string quartet played softly as hundreds of guests, politicians, celebrities, business titans, watched the trio make their entrance. The ceremony proceeded with choreographed precision. The officiant, a distinguished Episcopal bishop with political aspirations and financial ties to the Wallace Foundation, spoke eloquently about second chances and unexpected love. Graham recited his vows with convincing emotion, his performance flawless as he promised to cherish the woman who had brought his son back to him. When Mia's turn came, she stepped forward, her expression serene despite the tumult within. The cathedral fell silent, guests leaning forward in anticipation of the fairy tale moment. The former housekeeper turned princess, living the American dream. But the words that emerged from Mia's lips were not the expected vows. "Promises made from pain should not be collected through vanity," she began, her voice clear and strong in the hushed space. "I did not come here for a wedding. I came for a son." Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Graham's smile froze, his eyes darting to his publicist in the front row, who was already typing frantically on her phone. "Many of you have read the story in the papers," Mia continued, turning to address the assembled guests directly. "The miraculous tale of a boy who began speaking again because of a special connection with his father's housekeeper. But like many stories that seem too perfect, the truth is far more complex." She reached for Noah's hand, drawing him closer to her side. "This child is not Noah Wallace. His name is Elliot Rodriguez, and he is my son. Stolen from me after a car accident 3 years ago, when I was too injured to protect him." The cathedral erupted in gasps and exclamations. Cameras flashed frantically despite the strict no photography policy. Graham stepped forward, his face a mask of concern as he reached for Mia's arm. "Darling, you're overwhelmed. Let's take a moment." She stepped away from his grasp, her voice rising above the commotion. "I have DNA evidence. I have documentation of the fraud. I have proof that Graham Wallace orchestrated the kidnapping of my child, falsified adoption records, and has been systematically gaslighting me ever since." Security personnel began moving toward the altar, but halted when Noah suddenly spoke, his voice small but distinct in the chaotic space. "She's telling the truth. He took me from the hospital. He hurt my other mom." A collective hush fell over the cathedral as the assembled guests processed the unprecedented scene unfolding before them. Graham's face contorted with barely suppressed rage, his carefully constructed public persona crumbling in real time. "This is absurd," he sputtered, attempting to salvage the situation. "The boy is confused. This woman is clearly unstable." "Mr. Wallace," a stern voice cut through the tension as Eleanor Fletcher, the former housekeeper, rose from her seat in the back pew. "Perhaps you'd like to explain why Rebecca's bedroom door was locked from the outside the night of the fire, or why you threatened to destroy me if I ever spoke about what I heard that night." The momentum shifted palpably as other voices joined in. A nurse from the hospital, a former security guard from the Wallace estate, even Rebecca's sister, who had always harbored suspicions about her death. Each had been strategically invited by Mia, seated throughout the congregation like landmines waiting to be triggered. Graham's face drained of color as he realized the trap he'd walked into. This wasn't just a public rejection. It was a carefully orchestrated exposure, designed to leave him no path to redemption in the court of public opinion. With quiet dignity, Mia knelt before Noah, meeting his eyes. "It's time to go home now. Our real home." Noah nodded, relief washing over his features. He turned to Graham, his expression suddenly years older than his physical age. "You were never my dad," he said simply. "You just pretended." The powerful simplicity of the child's words seemed to affect Graham more than all the accusations combined. He staggered slightly as though physically struck. Mia rose, taking Noah's hand, and began walking down the aisle. The sea of stunned guests parted before them, whispers and camera clicks following their progress. As they reached the massive cathedral doors, sunlight streaming in from the outside world, Mia paused for one final statement. "I didn't come here for vengeance or wealth," she said, addressing the assembled crowd one last time. "I came for justice, for truth, for the chance to be a mother to the son who was taken from me." Her eyes found Graham's across the distance. "Your money can buy many things, Mr. Wallace, but it can't buy a mother's love, and it can't erase a child's memory." With those words, Mia pushed open the heavy doors, and together she and Noah stepped into the sunlight, leaving behind the opulence and deception of Graham Wallace's world. Outside, no limousines or luxury cars awaited them. Instead, Leanne Chen stood beside her modest sedan, ready to drive them to the small apartment Mia had prepared, the first true home they would share since their separation. It wasn't grand, it wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, built on truth rather than lies, on love rather than possession. As they drove away from the cathedral, Noah rested his head against Mia's shoulder, exhaustion from the emotional ordeal finally catching up to him. "Are we safe now?" he whispered, the worry in his voice a painful reminder of all he'd endured. Mia stroked his hair, the familiar texture beneath her fingers still miraculous to her. "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe, and we're together. That's what matters most." In the rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of Graham Wallace on the cathedral steps, surrounded by reporters shouting questions, his empire of secrets crumbling around him. The man who had once seemed all-powerful now appeared small, diminished by the exposure of his true nature. As Charleston receded behind them, Mia reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment, the unspeakable pain of losing a child, the hollow years of grief, the twist of fate that had placed her unknowingly in the same house as her stolen son, the silent communication between two souls that recognized each other despite every effort to keep them apart. Some might call it coincidence, others, divine intervention. But Mia knew it was something simpler and more profound, the unbreakable bond between mother and child, a connection that transcended trauma, deception, and even silence itself. "Sometimes," she whispered to Noah as his eyelids grew heavy with approaching sleep, "the only voice that matters is the one that finds us in the depths of silence." He smiled, understanding beyond his years reflected in his eyes. "I always heard you," he murmured. "Even when I couldn't speak, I always knew you'd find me." As Noah drifted to sleep against her shoulder, Mia gazed out at the road ahead, uncertain, challenging, but illuminated by a light that had been missing from her life for too long. The light of truth, the light of reunion, the light of a love that had refused to be extinguished, even in the darkest of circumstances. Some bonds transcend explanation. The invisible thread connecting a mother to her child defies logic, distance, and even the most elaborate deceptions. Mia's journey reminds us that love isn't just an emotion. It's a force powerful enough to break through years of silence, to recognize truth when all evidence has been corrupted. What would you have done in her position? Would you have had the courage to confront a billionaire with nothing but your intuition and a mother's certainty? In a world where wealth and power often determine whose truth gets heard, this story reminds us that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most profound truths. Noah's silence wasn't emptiness. It was a waiting, a remembering, a refusal to accept the false reality constructed around him. How long would you have remained silent if you were trapped in a life built on lies? And would you have recognized the voice that could finally set you free? This story isn't just about reunion. It's about redemption, about justice finding its way through the cracks of a seemingly impenetrable fortress of privilege. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who understands that the deepest connections in our lives are those that words alone cannot express. Let us know in the comments what other stories of extraordinary bonds you'd like to hear next.